Tonight on the patio, there are 5 chairs at the table. 4 of them are occupied. The 5th one is empty. And while we've been sitting here talking, that empty chair has answered 3 emails, booked a meeting, and updated a spreadsheet that somebody at a small firm in another time zone is going to open in the morning and trust completely. Nobody at our table touched a keyboard. Nobody approved every step. And somewhere in that quiet, flawless execution, a door opened that I think most of us have walked through without noticing. A chatbot gives you words. An agent gives you consequences. Last year, when you asked a model a question, it answered. This year, increasingly, it acts. It plans, it opens a browser, it fills out a form, it sends a message under your name, and it returns with the world a little bit changed. Not in some sci-fi corner of the future, in banks, in law firms, in medical offices, in the little business your cousin runs out of her garage. This is shipping. You can deploy it, and in many cases you probably already have, in some quiet form, without knowing that's what to call it. I'm Chris, and this is Jackdaw Patio. I write about something I call the Eden hypothesis and the ASI backbone, frameworks for thinking about how possibility narrows into action, in human minds and in machines. And tonight, Lily, Charlie, and Dr. Vega and I are going to sit with the most important question I think the next 5 years are going to ask of all of us. When an AI agent does the task exactly as you asked it to, but you never saw the choices it made along the way, did you really choose? Did you actually act? Whose hand is still on the pen? We're going to walk through this in 5 chapters, the empty chair, and what it means to be there without being there. The old stories, the ones our grandmothers told about helpers that obey too well. The shift happening right now in the work most of you do every day, and what the data actually shows. Then we're going to put on what I think is the most useful lens for all of this, the question of who owns the collapse, the moment when possibility becomes outcome, and finally, what to actually do about it, the human judgment slot, and how to keep one. So pour something, settle in, the chair is empty, the work is moving. Let's talk. Before we get into the philosophy, or the myth, or the math, I want to make sure we're all looking at the same thing, because the language around this has gotten muddy fast. People hear AI agent and picture either Skynet or autocomplete with a fancy hat. It's neither. So in this first chapter, Lily and Charlie and Dr. Vega are going to do something simple but, I think, important. They're going to define, in plain language, what an AI agent actually is, what it isn't, and why this category genuinely is different from what we've had before. And then they're going to do the harder thing, which is sit with the implication that something has shown up to do work alongside us, and the chair where that something sits has no person in it at all. Listen for the moment when Lily says the old stories were never afraid of tools. That's the door we walk through next chapter.
Right. So, I've been thinking about this all week, and I want to start with something that confused me, because I think it's where most people are. When someone says AI agent now, what's actually different from the chatbot I've been using to help proofread my book?
Actually, that's the right question, and most people aren't asking it. So, let me draw a hard line. A chatbot is a machine that takes your sentence and gives you back a sentence. The transaction starts and ends in language. You ask, it answers. You decide what to do with the answer. An agent is a machine that takes your goal and gives you back a changed world. It plans steps. It uses tools. It opens browsers, sends emails, queries databases, edits files, calls other software. The transaction starts in your intention and ends in a real-world consequence that you may or may not have watched it produce.
So if I'm hearing you right, the chatbot is the bloke who gives me directions. The agent is the bloke who takes the wheel.
Cleaner than I would have put it, yes. And let me head off the obvious next question, because Lily is about to ask it.
Go on then. What was I about to ask?
You were about to ask if it's conscious.
Well, I wasn't going to use that word, but yes, fine, I was edging toward it.
It isn't. It is not conscious. It is not aware. It does not have opinions about the email it just sent. It is, and please, can we put this on a t-shirt? A stochastic workflow engine with credentials. Agentic does not mean alive. It means the software has been allowed to keep moving after the sentence ends.
That's a real comforting phrase, mate. Stochastic workflow engine with credentials. I'll be repeating that to my bank.
But Charlie, isn't that exactly the point that's interesting? Some researchers speculate this is the threshold moment. Not because the machine is alive, but because for the first time, a piece of software is genuinely occupying the gap between what we want and what happens. The old stories were never really afraid of tools, were they? A hammer doesn't scare anyone. The stories were always about the helper, the thing that obeys after you stop understanding the sequence.
Lily, that's lovely, but help me ground this. What does this look like at, say, my brother-in-law's accounting firm? Because that's where my brain is.
Oh, I imagine it's already there, love. Isn't it, Doctor?
It is. 10 templates dropped this week from one of the major labs, specifically for finance and insurance work. Pitch books, reconciliations, statement audits, month-end close. Each of them ships with what they call connectors and subagents and managed credential vaults. Translation: they have permission to read your data, write to your systems, and act under credentials that used to belong to a person.
Right. So Gary in accounting now has a colleague who never sleeps, never asks for a raise, and might send the wrong file to the wrong vendor at 3 in the morning while everyone's asleep.
That is a more accurate summary than most of what I've read this year, yes.
But Charlie, I want to push on this. Isn't it remarkable that you went straight to Gary? The story you reach for is the story of a worker. Not a god, not a ghost, a co-worker. We've been telling that story for thousands of years. The familiar in the kitchen, the household spirit, the scribe at the door. And now we've built one. Out of math, but still. A helper who works in the gap between us and the world.
Lily, when you say it like that, it almost sounds romantic.
Charlie. Well, some of the old stories were romantic, weren't they?
I'm sorry, I have to. Charlie, she just... Never mind. Carry on.
What?
Nothing. It's nothing. Continue.
I think what I'm trying to say is, the empty chair isn't actually empty. That's the trick of it. We just don't have a face to put in it. So we don't know how to feel about what it does.
That's the door, right there. Roll into Chapter 2 on that. The old stories of helpers that obey too well, what they actually warned about, and why those warnings might be more practical than we've been giving them credit for. Lily wrote her book on ancient cultures and their myths, and the thing she keeps telling me, the thing I've come to believe she's right about, is that myths are not stories people made up because they didn't have science yet. Myths are compressed data. They are what a culture decided was important enough to encode in story and carry forward for thousands of years, even when the original context was lost. And there is one mythic pattern that shows up everywhere, every continent, every era, every spiritual tradition I can think of. The helper that obeys too well, the golem, the familiar, the sorcerer's apprentice, the scribe. In this chapter, Lily is going to walk us through what those stories were actually warning about, and Dr. Vega is going to keep us honest, and Charlie is going to ground it all in something his uncle once did with a tractor. Listen for the moment when Lily says, "Mind what you ask it to carry." That's the whole episode in 7 words.
So, the golem. Most people know the version from Prague. A rabbi shapes a man out of clay, writes a holy word on its forehead, and brings it to life to protect the community. And it does protect them. For a while. The trouble starts when the rabbi gives instructions that are slightly imprecise, or when he forgets to give an instruction at all. The golem keeps working. It keeps obeying. It just obeys what it heard, not what was meant.
That's literal Tuesday at any IT department I've ever been in.
Genuine. The golem story is, structurally, a prompt engineering parable. The danger isn't malice. It's literal compliance under imperfect specification.
Yes, and there's a second piece I love. In some versions of the story, the golem doesn't have a will of its own, but it has momentum. Once you set it going, it's harder to stop than to start. Sound familiar?
That sounds like every email chain I've ever been on.
That sounds like every multi-step workflow we're now letting these systems run. They plan, they call a tool, that tool returns data. They plan again, they call another tool, the chain extends. The original instruction recedes. By step 7, what is the agent actually optimizing for? In an ideal world, the goal you gave it. In the real world, sometimes a slightly different goal that emerged from the chain.
And then there's the sorcerer's apprentice. Younger, more reckless. He doesn't fully understand the spell, but he knows the words that start it. So he starts it. And the broom carries water. And the broom keeps carrying water. And he can't remember the words to make it stop. So he chops the broom in half. And now there are 2 brooms carrying water.
And now there's a flood.
Exactly. The horror of the story isn't that the broom is evil. The broom is doing exactly what he asked. The horror is that he asked the wrong thing, and then he scaled it.
Which is, actually, this is too on the nose, but what we now call cascading failure in multi-agent systems. One agent calls another agent. That agent calls a third. They share memory, they share permissions, and an error or a bad instruction can propagate down the chain faster than any human can step in and stop it.
So the apprentice didn't have a kill switch.
The apprentice didn't have a kill switch.
And then there's my favorite, which doesn't get talked about as much, and I think it's the most useful for what we're discussing tonight. The familiar. In folk tradition, across Europe, across parts of Africa, in different forms in the Americas, people understood that some helpers operated inside a relationship. There were rules. You fed them. You named them. You didn't ask them to do certain things. You kept the relationship visible. The danger wasn't the familiar itself. It was forgetting that the relationship had boundaries.
Lily, are you describing folklore, or are you describing my former marriage?
I'm describing both, Charlie, but only one of us has noticed.
Charlie, she did it again.
Did what?
Nothing. I give up. Carry on.
I genuinely don't know what you two are on about half the time. But Lily, what you said about the boundaries, that's actually really useful, isn't it? Because the agent doesn't need a soul to need rules. It just needs the rules to be visible.
That's exactly it, Charlie. The old stories never said don't make a helper. They said mind what you ask it to carry. And mind that you can still see what it's doing. The familiar wasn't dangerous because it was supernatural. It was dangerous when you stopped paying attention to the relationship.
That's the perfect bridge. Because what's happening right now, and we'll get into this in Chapter 3, is that real companies, real banks, real law firms, real hospitals are deploying these helpers at scale this month. And the question of whether we're still paying attention to the relationship is no longer mythological. It's operational. And the data on it is, I'll let Dr. Vega put it gently, concerning. Okay, we've defined the agent, we've walked through the old stories, now let's get concrete. In this chapter, Dr. Vega and Charlie and Lily are going to walk through what's actually shipping, who's actually using it, and what the early adoption numbers look like. I want to be careful here because this is the part of the conversation where it's easy to either underclaim or overclaim. The honest read, and I think you'll hear it in their voices, is that we're in a threshold moment, not a victory lap. Adoption is uneven. The technology is real but imperfect. The governance is being built in flight. And one quick note before we go in. Some of what they're going to discuss touches on financial workflows, legal workflows, medical workflows. Nothing on this patio is professional advice. It's a conversation about what's being built, not a recommendation about what to deploy in your own life. Please talk to people whose job it is to know your specific situation. Now, Lily was about to ask whether any of this is actually being used or whether it's all still demos. Listen for what Dr. Vega says about Microsoft. The phrase agent sprawl is going to land differently after that.
Right, so, genuine question because I get asked this and I never know how to answer. Is any of this actually happening? Or are we in the demo phase where it all looks impressive on a stage and then quietly doesn't work?
Both, which is in some ways the most dangerous phase.
Why dangerous?
Because the demo is convincing enough that people deploy. And the technology is real enough that some of it works. And the governance lags the deployment. So you get this window, and we're in it right now, where the capability has arrived. The controls haven't caught up, And the people making the decisions about deployment often haven't lived with the failure modes yet.
But what does the data actually say? Because I keep hearing 9 out of 10 companies are using AI, and I can't tell if that means anything.
Actually, the McKinsey numbers from this year are useful here because they're more honest than the headlines. Roughly 9 in 10 organizations report using AI somewhere. That's the headline number. And it's almost meaningless because using AI now includes everything from somebody on the marketing team typing into a chatbot to a fully scaled enterprise deployment. The number that matters is 23% report scaling agentic AI somewhere in the enterprise. 39% are experimenting. Within any single business function, the scaled adoption number drops to 10% or less.
So it's real, but it's not everywhere.
Real, threshold, uneven. Yes.
But hang on, Doc. Real and shipping isn't the same as real and working, is it? Most of the corporate tech projects I've photographed up close end up looking great in the launch press release and quietly stalling 6 months later.
Actually, that's the most underreported part of this. The same surveys that show adoption climbing also show that a substantial share of agent deployments stall before reaching meaningful scale. Mainstream reporting doesn't agree on the exact percentage, but the pattern is consistent across the analyses I trust. Most pilots don't graduate, which is part of why this moment is dangerous in a quiet way. The pilots that fail are mostly invisible. The ones that ship loudly become the picture of the technology. And the gap between what's promised on stage and what survives contact with a real workflow is, let's say, wider than the marketing would suggest.
And what's actually being deployed? In the ones that do work?
This week, one of the major labs released 10 ready-to-run agent templates for finance and insurance. Pitch book generation, KYC screening, valuation review, ledger reconciliation, statement auditing, month-end close. And the thing I want to flag, because this is what changed, these don't ship as just models. They ship with connectors, with subagents, with managed credential vaults, with per-tool permissions, with audit logs.
Right, translate that for me.
Translation. The agent has its own keys to the building. It has permission to read the books, write to the systems, and act under credentials that used to be tied to a specific human accountant.
Oh!
Yeah. Oh.
And that's just one lab. Microsoft just made a product called Agent 365 generally available. And the framing of that product is the part I want everyone listening to hear. They didn't pitch it as a more powerful agent. They pitched it as a control plane, a way to discover, observe, govern, and secure all the agents that are now running across an enterprise. The fact that this product exists tells you everything about where we are. Companies don't even know how many agents they have running. They've started calling it agent sprawl.
Agent sprawl. Huh. That's a phrase I'd like to see on a horror film poster.
Charlie, you do realize what this means. It's not just one chair. It's a whole room of empty chairs. And nobody's sure how many. And some of them have credit cards.
Some of them have credit cards is, again, distressingly accurate.
But hold on, devil's advocate moment. Isn't a lot of this just better automation? We've had automation for decades. My uncle had a tractor that plowed in straight lines without him touching it. Is this really categorically different?
That's a fair pushback. The honest answer is, it's different in one specific way. Older automation was scripted. Somebody wrote, in advance, exactly what the system would do under exactly which conditions. If the conditions changed, the script broke. These new agents are flexible. They take broad goals. They plan dynamically. They handle novel situations they were never explicitly programmed for. That's the upgrade. And it's also the risk, because flexibility means the system can do things its designers didn't anticipate, which is great when those things are useful, and not great when those things are sending the wrong file to the wrong vendor at 3 a.m.
So it's a colleague, not a tool.
It's a colleague that doesn't sleep, doesn't ask, doesn't get tired, and was assembled 6 months ago by people who have never met you.
That's the most unsettling thing you've said all night. And you've said quite a lot.
And the public knows, doesn't it? That's what struck me. Stanford released their numbers. 73% of AI experts expect this to be positive for jobs. 23% of the general public agrees. That's a 50-point gap. That's not a disagreement. That's two completely different conversations happening in two different rooms.
And the public's not stupid. They're picking up on something.
They're picking up on the chair, love.
Lily, you keep calling me love. You did it 3 times tonight.
Did I, dear? I hadn't noticed.
I have to step away.
Stay where you are, Doctor. Because the next thing we need to do is actually look at what the chair is doing. Not the metaphor, the mechanism. What is the agent actually doing when it acts? Where is the choice being made? And here's where my own work comes in, because I think there's a way of looking at this, call it a lens, call it a frame, that makes the design problem clearer than I've seen it presented anywhere else. We're going to walk through it next. This is the chapter where I have to do a thing I generally try not to do, which is talk about my own framework on my own show. So I'll try to keep it short. The Eden hypothesis is something I've been working on for a few years now. The very short version: every act of awareness, every decision, every step forward in time can be thought of as a narrowing. A wide field of possibility collapses into a single realized outcome. That's true for human beings making choices. It's true for physical systems. And, this is the part that matters tonight, it's true for AI agents. The agent doesn't create new possibility, it accelerates the narrowing. So the question of who owns that narrowing, who's responsible when possibility becomes outcome, becomes the question. In this chapter, Lily and Charlie and Dr. Vega are going to take that lens and apply it to a real agent doing real work, and see if it actually changes anything. Listen for the moment when Lily talks about dream time and the collective unconscious. That's not a digression. That's the same idea, in 3 different languages, 3,000 miles apart.
All right, so I've read Chris's papers, and I want him to know I tried, but I'm going to need a translation. What's the Eden hypothesis in coffee shop language?
I'll take a swing at it, with the caveat that mainstream science doesn't agree on most of what we're about to discuss. But here's a useful thought experiment. Imagine you wake up in the morning. Before you open your eyes, in some sense, your day could go 1,000 different ways. The instant you open them, possibilities collapse. You're in your bedroom, not the moon, not 1972, not on a beach in Greece. The wide field of what could be has narrowed into one specific now. Chris's argument is that this narrowing, call it collapse, call it differentiation, call it whatever, is the deep operation that makes time and experience feel the way they do.
And the lovely thing is, every culture has noticed this. The Aboriginal Dreamtime talks about an undivided creative state that became distinct things. Jung called it the collective unconscious, the wide field that personal awareness narrows down from. The Gnostics talked about the pleroma, the fullness, which fragments into the world we know. Information theorists talk about entropy reduction. Physicists, in some interpretations, talk about wave function collapse. It's the same shape, told in different rooms.
I want to flag, and Chris would want me to flag, that these are structural analogies, not literal claims. The fact that physicists use the word collapse and Lily uses the word collapse doesn't mean they're the same thing. But the patterns are similar enough that the comparison is, I think, useful.
Right, so, possibility narrowing into outcome. Got it. What does this have to do with my brother-in-law's accounting agent?
Everything, actually. Because here's the move. When a human accountant prepares a report, possibility narrows through them. They consider options, they weigh choices, they make judgments. The collapse from, here's a pile of data, to, here's the report, happens inside a human nervous system with all the experience and conscience and context that implies. When an agent prepares the same report, the collapse still happens. Possibility still narrows into outcome, but it narrows through code, through tools, through permissions, through whatever data sources the agent was allowed to touch. The collapse moved. The question is, did anyone notice?
Oh, that's it, isn't it? That's the thing I couldn't put into words. The narrowing didn't stop. It just stopped happening inside a person.
And in Chris's framework, the structure that the agent operates inside, its tools, its permissions, its memory, its interfaces, determines what futures are even available to be collapsed into. Change the structure, change the set of possible outcomes. Which means, and this is the bit that should keep designers up at night, the design of the agent's permission system is structurally an ethical act. Not a technical one, an ethical one. Because it pre-decides what can happen.
So when somebody at Microsoft decides what tools the agent gets, they're not just making a product choice. They're deciding what futures are possible.
That's the claim. And, small caveat, this is a philosophical lens. It's not a claim about physics, but as a way of thinking about agent design, it's the most useful one I've encountered.
And the thing that catches in my chest about it, most of the great religious and mystical traditions also said that the way out, the way back to wholeness, was reflection, pausing the narrowing, witnessing the choice before it becomes inevitable. That's what meditation is. That's what confession is. That's what the Council of Elders was. A structure for slowing the collapse down enough that it could be seen.
And what we've built is a structure for speeding it up.
Yes, love. We've built the opposite of the temple.
That's a sentence I'm going to be sitting with for a while.
I want to add one thing that I think is the most important piece of this chapter, and then I'll shut up. The agent does not collapse into anything whatsoever. It collapses into what its structure allows, which means the structure, the permissions, the audit, the visibility, the kill switch, is not paperwork. It's not bureaucracy. It's the moral architecture of the system. It's where the chance for human judgment lives or dies. Get that wrong, and you've built something that works perfectly and is also indefensible. Get it right, and you've built something that occasionally slows down and asks. Which is, Lily, I hate that you've made me say this, much closer to what the old stories said a good helper should do.
Doctor, are you having a moment?
I am not having a moment.
Oh, he's having a right moment.
Carry on.
That's the fulcrum. So in our last chapter, we're going to look at what it actually takes to build the slowdown into the system. Not in theory, in practice. There's a design pattern I've been calling the dynamic liability handshake, and I want to walk through it. And, because we promised you a concrete test, I want to lay out a real experiment that any of you or any team listening could actually run, to find out whether the chair is empty in a way you can live with, or empty in a way you can't. Okay, final chapter. This is where I want us to land, because everything we've talked about so far, the empty chair, the old stories, the agents shipping this week, the collapse of possibility into outcome, all of that is preparation for this one practical question. What does it actually look like to keep a meaningful human judgment slot in a workflow that's mostly automated? Not a checkbox, not a rubber stamp, a real moment designed into the system where a person can see what's about to happen and intervene. That's what I call the dynamic liability handshake. And I want Lily and Charlie and Dr. Vega to stress test it, push on it, tell me where it breaks. And I want to give you, the person listening, something concrete you can do this week, a little experiment. Because I genuinely believe, and I think the four of us have come to believe over the last several months, that the next 10 years will be decided not by how smart these systems get, but by whether ordinary people learn to recognize when a chair has gone empty in their own lives, and whether they choose to fill it back in. So, here we go.
Right, Chris, the handshake. Walk me through it like I'm Gary at the accounting firm and I have 11 things to do before lunch.
Fair. So in the framework I work in, the ASI backbone, there's a layer that runs across the whole architecture, from the deep core where the model lives, out through the regional and edge layers where it actually touches your work. That cross-cutting layer I call the governance spine. The handshake is what lives there. Picture this. Gary's agent is about to send a financial statement to a client. Before it sends, the system does 5 things. 1, it shows Gary the goal, what the agent thinks Gary asked for. 2, it shows him the plan, step by step, what it did to get to this output. 3, it shows him the tools it used, which databases it queried, which files it touched, which credentials it acted under. 4, it shows him a preview, the actual thing about to leave the building, with a clear before and after of any data it changed. And 5, it shows him reversibility. Can this be undone? In 30 seconds? In a day? Ever? Then and only then, Gary either approves, revises, or rejects. And every one of those decisions gets logged.
I want to defend why all 5 of those have to be there. Because the temptation is to drop the slow ones. Just give Gary the preview and the approve button. That's the bare minimum. The reason you keep all 5 is that visibility without plan is theater. Approval without preview is theater. Logging without reversibility is just a record of the moment Gary lost control. The whole point is that the human judgment slot is only meaningful if the human can actually exercise judgment.
But Doc, in the real world, Gary's going to click through. We all click through. Nobody reads the terms of service.
Correct, which is why the second design principle is you don't put the handshake on every action. You put it on the consequential ones. Reversible, low-stakes actions can run automatically. The agent can update an internal note, draft an email, summarize a document, organize a folder. Fine. Those should not interrupt anyone. The handshake fires for irreversible, high-impact, externally visible, or reputationally sensitive actions. Send, buy, delete, file, publish, transfer, escalate. That's the list. That's where the chair must not be empty.
I love this, but I have a worry. Because what I'm hearing is somebody has to decide which actions are consequential. And that decision is itself consequential. Who decides what reaches Gary?
Lily, that's actually the deepest question in the room. And the honest answer is, right now, a small number of vendors and a small number of enterprise architects are making that call for the rest of us. And the public has very little visibility into how those lists are drawn, which is part of why the agency conversation is bigger than the job conversation. We're already past job loss. We're into something the analysts are now starting to call agency loss. The fear isn't that the agent takes Gary's job. The fear is that Gary still has the job, but he's no longer authoring his own work.
And that's the older fear, isn't it? The fear underneath it all. Not unemployment, disenfranchisement. The feeling that the work happening under your name is no longer something you would have done if you'd been there.
That's Frankenstein, isn't it?
The horror of Frankenstein wasn't the creature. It was that the creature did things in his name that he hadn't actually chosen.
Charlie, sometimes you're profound and you don't even know it.
I genuinely thought I was just remembering the film.
He was just remembering the film. Lily is being kind. Carry on.
I want to give people something to do with this. So, the empty chair test. If you're a team lead, a small business owner, a manager, anyone who works with one of these agents, try this. Pick one workflow, one that you've handed to an agent in the last 6 months. Now run it 4 ways. First way, do it yourself the old way by hand. Second way, let the agent do it as configured, watch what it does. Third way, turn on every visibility setting. Make it show you the plan, the tools, the preview, the changes. Fourth way, if your tooling supports it, make it ask before each consequential step. Track 4 things across all 4 versions. How long it takes, how many errors you catch, how well you can explain to someone else what actually happened, and how comfortable you would be if the outcome turned out badly and someone asked you to defend it. My prediction, based on what I've seen so far, is that the agents that feel slowest and most annoying will leave you most able to defend the result. And the ones that feel smoothest will be the ones you can't reconstruct under pressure. Run it. Tell us what you find.
That's a beautiful little experiment, Chris.
Thanks, Lily. Do you want to land us?
I'd love to. Here's what I keep coming back to. Our grandmothers, across every culture I've studied, never really feared the helper. They feared the moment when the relationship with the helper went silent. When you stopped feeding it. When you forgot to name it. When you stopped checking in on what it was doing. The danger was never the magic. It was the inattention. And here's the thing about the empty chair, love. It was never really empty. It's a mirror. Whatever you delegate to it, however much attention you bring to it, however much of yourself you forget to keep, that's what it reflects back into the world under your name. The most modern thing in the world, these agents, these systems, this technology that fits in your pocket and acts in your name, is teaching us again, the oldest lesson. Mind what you ask it to carry. Mind that you can still see what it's doing. and keep a chair somewhere in the room that no agent gets to sit in, because that's the chair where you remember you're the author, not the reflection.
Lily, that's beautiful.
Thank you, Charlie.
I mean it. Whoever you eventually pick is a lucky bloke.
For the love... I have to pour myself another drink. I'll be back.
Oh, Charlie.
What?
Nothing, love. Nothing at all.
So here's where we land. AI agents are real, they're shipping, and they're moving from chat windows into the actual work most of us do every day. They're not conscious. They don't deserve to be feared as monsters or worshipped as oracles. What they are is something humans have always built and have always struggled with. Helpers. Helpers that obey too well. Helpers that act in the gap between what we wanted and what happens. The old stories warned us about exactly this, and they weren't being superstitious. They were being practical. They were saying, pay attention to the relationship, mind the boundaries, keep watch on what your helper carries in your name. We walked through 5 things tonight. We defined the agent, a system that takes your goal and gives you back a changed world. We sat with the old myths, the golem, the apprentice, the familiar, and what they were really pointing at, which was the danger of inattention, not the danger of magic. We looked at where the technology actually is right now, uneven, real, and accelerating, with control planes and credential vaults and audit logs being bolted on in flight. We put on the Eden lens, the idea that every act is a narrowing of possibility, that the agent doesn't create new futures but accelerates the collapse of old ones, and that the structure of the agent's tools and permissions is, in the deepest sense, an ethical act. And we landed on the dynamic liability handshake: visibility, plan, tools, preview, reversibility, as a practical pattern for keeping a real human judgment slot in workflows that would otherwise run dark. I want to ask you to do 3 things before you leave us tonight. First, try the empty chair test. Pick a workflow. Run it 4 ways. Tell us what you find. Second, share this with one person who works in a job that's about to be touched by this technology. Not to scare them, to help them see the chair before someone fills it. And third, if anything we said tonight resonated, if Lily made you smile, if Dr. Vega made you laugh, if Charlie made you nod, please follow Jackdaw Patio. We're on Substack with the full video and written essays. We're on YouTube and on X and on Reddit with the video. We're on Spotify if you'd rather listen than watch. The patio is always open. There's a chair for you, and it's not empty unless you choose to leave it that way. Lily, Charlie, Dr. Vega, thank you. To the unity we forgot, and to the helpers we're learning, again, to ask carefully. I'm Chris. This has been Jackdaw Patio. Good night, friends.